Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to go into the last chapter, the last topic for critical thinking, which is going to be mass media. The idea or the reason why we are looking into mass media is because when it comes to critical thinking, we have to evaluate whatever information we get. And basically, one of the most important elements or one of the most important platforms for us to get information is going to be mass media. Might it be through television or radio or internet, for example. So these are examples of the platforms which might be used to transmit information to us. And that is why, as critical thinkers, we have to really be critical upon evaluating information, factual information, opinions, because it's being bombarded to us on a daily basis. When you watch the news, for example, you have a lot of information being given to us, and it comes to the idea that you have to be a critical thinker, and you really have to think when you get the information, because not all the information might be true, some might be not, especially with the advancement of internet, whereby anyone or everyone can actually share information. And you might have people sharing information on Facebook, on WhatsApp, for example, and sometimes we take things for granted and we take it as the absolute truth, which is always not the case. So we are going to look into mass media, and we are going to look into the idea of the development that has been done in terms of how message has been transmitted to people, and we are going to look into as well how the internet has changed the perception of people and the ability of people to get more information in the long run. All right. So let's move on to the first definition of mass media itself. So a medium or media is a channel of communication, which is a means for the people to send and receive messages. So here, if we look at the idea of mass media, say for example, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we are talking about two channels, ideally, the radio and the TV. And when we are talking about radio and TV, it's not really receiving, in terms of communication, it's rather a one-way communication. And when you're talking about one-way communication, we as listeners or as viewers, we don't have any channel at that moment of watching to actually rebut or to give our opinions or to ask questions. All right, but through the advancements of technology, and we are looking into internet, we have a better source of giving opinions, or to ask whoever is giving the opinion to justify. So that is rather, we are looking into how the advancement of mass media has taken place in the last 20, 30 years. All right. So mass means many. So here we are interested to look into the idea of how and why different forms of media are used to transmit people. And when we mention the idea of mass, we are talking about a lot of people. Say, for example, if you are looking into television in Malaysia itself, I bet each house has at least a television. So if you're talking about 35 million people in Malaysia, probably 90% of the people will have access to television. So it helps whoever is giving the information to transmit it to a huge number of people. So radio, television, internet nowadays is the same idea. It's the same idea. All right. So 21st century mass media now encompasses social networks and forums, as I mentioned before. You have the internet nowadays, which enables you to not only receive information, but you can actually provide your own opinion as well. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Now, when we talk about mass media, you have two different entities which controls mass media. The first one is corporation controlled mass media, and the other one is government controlled mass media, which I'm going to show you later. So ideally, what is happening here is we are using whatever is happening in the US as the background to our discussion, but I'll try to relate it to what is happening in Malaysia as well. All right. So mass media corporations have grown so large, they control almost all private mass media. So in the US, there are only 9 corporations controlling them. Also, ideally, is very limited in terms of the number of corporations, because I don't think they can have too many. Then they can't really control that number of these corporations which are emitting news or emitting any kind of information. So is this something dangerous, or is it biased in a sense that when you control this mass media in terms of the corporation which is conducting or giving us news, is it going to be biased? Or you have to think as well, what are the agendas which they have? Because according to their agenda, then ideally they are going to transmit the information on, or how they want it to be. All right. So social networks also control information and sell information to companies about yourself and the public. Say, for example, if you are looking into Facebook, for example, so when you want to enter Facebook, you are supposed to tick a lot of boxes and indicate information, maybe private information about yourself. And ideally, this information, if it's leaked out, then people can misuse your information and stuff. So ideally, it's quite dangerous. Like what is happening to what's the name? Cambridge Analytica. So Cambridge Analytica is an example of a company which uses this private information of people, and they emit information based on how the people are acting, or how the characteristics of the people, in order to be efficient in providing news and getting people to trust whatever is being given. All right, so is it ethical? So should your privacy be sold as commodity? So these are the questions which we need to ask ourselves, because when we are into, say, as I mentioned just now, Facebook, then you have privacy. You are supposed to be given privacy, because whatever you have given, your private information, is not supposed to be given to other people. So is it okay for other people to access your privacy? Think about it. All right. Now, if we look into Malaysia itself, right? If we look into Malaysia itself, corporation control mass media could be, for example, Astro. All right, Astro, because they are not really under the government. They are a private organization, and they emit news. You have Astro Media, for example, news being given on Astro. You have sports, you have other things, cartoons, maybe documentaries, and these are the things which are emitted through Astro. All right, so Astro is one example of a corporation in Malaysia itself which controls the mass media. All right, so in the US it's much, much, much bigger. So ideally, you might have more corporations there, but in Malaysia, I can think of at the moment Astro. All right, Astro, as an example. Well, looking into government-controlled mass media, well, ideally, the name itself is government, so we know that the government controls certain outlets for mass media, and this is ideally used to admit information, or to provide information according to how the government wants to be. So it doesn't mean in terms of just politics, for example. It can be in terms of health, whereby the government can look into the idea of how to educate the people in terms of getting to know about NCDs, non-communicable diseases, diabetes, for example, high blood pressure. So these are the things which the government might want to, provide the people with more information on. But on the other hand, you can also look at it from the point of view that the government might want to give whatever they feel necessary to the people, because it's controlled by them. And nearly all countries have this government-controlled mass media. In certain countries, it might be a little bit more rigid. In certain countries, it's a bit more free. If we look at the US, it's really, really free, whereby the people can actually tell the government off anytime they want on mass media. But in Malaysia, it's much more controlled, whereby the people can't really, bombard the government anytime they want on, TV3, for example, and TV7, for example. What do you call this? Media Prima, if I'm not mistaken. So Media Prima is not really fully government controlled, but is partially government controlled, if I say. So examples of controlled, really controlled mass media would be, for example, TV1 or TV2, because it is really controlled by the government, and whatever information is given on TV1 and TV2 has to really go to the government first. But on the other hand, TV3, because I have friends working for TV3, ideally they say that the information needs to be screened before it is showcased to the people. All right. So as I mentioned before, Malaysia might be one of the places of which does not really practice the freedom of media in terms of television. All right. On the other hand, if you look at, for example, say North Korea, state media is the only media allowed. When we say state media as the only media allowed, just imagine, yeah, whatever is given to us, whatever information is provided to us, it is from the government. So if the government says this, there's no other source to say that this is not good. And if the government says this is actually good, then that is going to be the only source of information which the citizens are going to get. If you have time, I would like you to go to YouTube and search for information of how North Korea controls the people's mind through mass media, because it's really interesting. I had a look at one piece of YouTube video whereby somebody from the US actually was invited. It was only a few people into the government, and they were actually having a parade of their weapons and stuff to make the people, to show to the people that they have a very strong unit, soldiers, army. So when they interviewed a few North Koreans, and what they got was that these North Koreans had no idea that the world outside is so much bigger, and there are more governments with more weapons of destruction which can actually what do you call this which can actually distinguish them as a nation. So in their mind, the North Koreans, because what is being given here is that information from the government of North Korea, therefore they believe that North Korea is the strongest nation, and no matter what, North Korea will win in any war. That was being bombarded to them. So it's really interesting to think about how mass media controls human minds. So if we look at that, right, because North Korea does not allow internet, that's the main problem. So when you don't allow the internet, then ideally you can control whatever is being given to us. But if you look at Malaysia, for example, right, and if you look at whatever is happening before the 1990s, for example, whereby the government has been winning big in terms of elections and stuff, and if we move forward to 2008, 2013, for example, where in terms of election, the people are more have more information, have more sources of information, and this has helped them to become thinkers. And the news might be right, the news might be not right, at times, but then we are being given more information. So what happens is we have more channels. We can think ideally, because we are being given more sources of information, might it be good or bad, but we have more channels to it. Okay, so that's actually the good thing about having other sources than the government controlled mass media itself. All right. Okay, so the question here is what the mass media transmitting always the truth? So you might want to ask yourself, when you look at something on the mass media, as I mentioned before, if it's television, then probably, I won't say that it's not lying, but it's not telling the whole truth, when it comes to these kind of things, because you can choose what to tell, you can choose not what to tell. So when you say the truth, it's very relative, So I believe, like, I don't know about you, you might want to think about it, but I believe that the question is not really on transmitting the truth or something which is not true, but rather, is the mass media transmitting everything to us? Okay, because when you want to evaluate something, you have to know everything in order for you to come up with an evaluation which is not biased. All right, so think about it yourself. Okay. Now, moving on to the next slide, sensational, what is this here? Sensationalism. Wow, this is really tongue twister, isn't it? It's a tongue twister. Sensationalism and entertainment. Now, when you have the mass media and when you have information which is provided to us, ideally, it's not always information which is heavy. Sometimes it can be something which is not heavy, entertaining, for example, controversial, for example. Now, why are these things being transmitted to us as well? Through corporation mass media or to government mass media? Well, the reason is because that is what humans want to watch, and that is what humans are attracted to. Say, for example, if you guys think about it, yeah, when you go to the internet or when you watch television, for example, what do you watch? What kind of information do you watch? Say, for example, you take your time as 100%, then I believe 90% of the time you would use it to watch something which is entertaining, maybe you know, sports, for example, or movies, for example. So these are entertaining stuff, and these are the things which we want to watch as humans, you know. And think about it, when you get information on Facebook, for example, what kind of information are actually being given to you? On WhatsApp, for example, when people send it to groups, for example, what kind of information is being given on WhatsApp, for example? All right, so it might be something horrible like accidents, it might be something funny, for example, like jokes, and these are the things which people are attracted to, you know, because we want to listen, we want to know about these kind of things rather than the boring stuff, which would be politics, for example, really boring, right? So we don't really want to know about these kind of things, right? So in saying that, when we look into mass media as well, we are looking at them gaining more viewers into their channel, because that's one of the ways for them to get money. And the more viewers we get, of course, the higher the rating is. The higher the rating is, corporations are going to look into these sources of mass media to promote their stuff or to advertise their stuff, and in a certain way, they are going to get more money in that manner. All right. So in the US itself, foreign news is shown for only 1 minute, and sports and weather broadcast takes about 40% of the time of a 30-minute broadcast. So that really indicates that you know, the important stuff or the actual boring stuff is shown for only a short while compared to things which we as humans would like to know about. So, you know, which is taking up rather a lot of time. Okay. So Fox News, a news corporation, often report and judge on events, even though it is 100% untrue. Now, why is this the case? Because sometimes, you know, when people want to admit information, if you want to look into if the information is 100% accurate or not accurate, you have people who, in these corporations, people who would screen this news before they reach us as viewers. But sometimes the problem is they're forced to go into giving us or providing us the quick news, you know, because if there is even half an hour, for example, then other people are going to showcase the news and they are going to lose something. And when this happens, sometimes the information which is given to us might not be 100% true. Sometimes it's false altogether, like the example which is given here. So sometimes, you know, if we can call it a lie, then it is obviously a lie or reports on the wrong facts. But the reason why they have to do this because they want to get viewers, and you know, the faster they put out this information, the more people are going to watch it. You know, if you have, for example, just imagine you have two different platforms of news, right? One is faster, one is slower. Of course, you're going to go to the faster one. So that is logical. Okay, so sometimes it might be true, sometimes it might not be true. And when we look into the idea of bias in news presented to us, the biasness in news presented to us, as I mentioned before just now, this government or corporation-controlled media would usually provide us with news according to how they want us to look at it. All right, so it's not saying, as I mentioned before, whether it's true or false. It's just that it's how they see it and how they want us to see it as well. Say, for example, the simplest example, if you watch, I think, NST, or you read NST, for example, newspaper news, NST on yahoo.com, because yahoo.com is ideally my source of information. I like to read yahoo.com because I feel that you have a lot of information which is sometimes biased, sometimes not. You have different sources which is applied and placed on Yahoo, so you can actually choose what you want to read. You can read everything, any kind of source of information. So to me, it's actually really good. But if you look, for example, right, if you look at NST, and if you read NST, especially when it comes to election time, or when it comes 1 or 2 months before election, everything is pointing out towards the idea that the government is actually doing this project. The government is doing a lot of things which is going to benefit the people. Now, this is ideally true. Why? Because if you look at what is being done by the government, it is actually helping the people, and they are showcasing this to show that they help the people. But the question is, to what extent? And how is it actually helping the majority of the people? And is it actually helping everyone, in a sense? And how is it being implemented, for example? So these might be the things which have been omitted, and information which is given to us is just a partial truth. So you might have read it, you might have known this as well. So this would be what we call biasness in news, because ideally, as I mentioned before, we would always try to give, or try to provide things which we want other people to understand. All right. So another simple example. Let's not talk about something which is you know big. Let's talk about something which is small. You you hit another person's car when you're driving, for example. So then you have the victim, the car in front, maybe in that situation, who knows, and the person who hit the car in front, right? So you have two different stories, and believe it or not, if you go to the police and report the incident, then you have two different sides of the story. Each person might want to showcase that they are right, because they don't want to be, penalty. They don't want to have to pay a penalty, right? So this is a very simple example of what is happening um, in newspaper or mass media, information which is given to us through mass media, biasness in news. All right. So if you look here, this is an example of what is happening in America, right? So ideally, there are biasness in terms of gender, in terms of age, in terms of racial biasness, and nearly all American-backed media will concentrate on American lives, despite one death, as opposed to hundreds and thousands of non-Americans living in war-related issues. So, because if you look at America, right, what is happening is they send their troops overseas in a what do you call this, in the Arab countries, for example, the Middle East. They send the troops over there. So if one person dies, then that is going to be showcased, and this person is going to be called a hero. But if hundreds or thousands of people, civilians, die in these Arab countries, then ideally little coverage is given to these people. So that's another example of biasness in news. All right. So as I mentioned before, news networks are also profit driven. So when we say profit driven, then we are talking about sponsors having their own agendas, even through the products advertised. Like, for example, you're talking about Nike, Adidas, all these big companies, McDonald's, KFCs, and when they want to advertise their stuff on news network, then they have to pay a lot of money, and of course they want to get more people, so they are looking into platforms of which they can actually admit the information to more people, right? So sometimes you also have scientific reports in mass media which are often misinterpreted. Well, here you have the sample of the media often sensationalized Armageddon, or the end of the planet situations. Well, this is actually a very interesting thing, because According to a research done, there was a possibility of an asteroid hitting Earth in 2000. I think the research was done in 2005, if I'm not mistaken. So, according to scientists, there was a possibility of an asteroid hitting Earth, and if it directly hit Earth, then ideally it would mean the end of the world. So that was, the conclusion which the scientists came up with. But what was neglected was the fact that the possibility of it hitting Earth was only 0.001%. So it's a very, very small percentage, very small percentage. But what happened was the media actually ignored the fact that you had only a very small percentage of the possibility of it hitting Earth, and they took it as something which was absolute, as if it was definitely going to hit Earth. So when that happened, you have movies like Armageddon, for example, and ideas that it would be the end of the world, and people took it as the truth. So ideally, it's really rather dangerous if you look at it from that point of view, because you know um, when you misinterpret a certain information, then and you're giving it to the people, a mass of the people, sometimes we don't really look into it as in, is it true, is it not true, but we take things for granted and receive it as the whole truth. Why? Because sometimes we are lazy to do our own research, we are lazy to search for information. So when you get people who are lazy to do so, then you have this news being transferred to them, and they're going to transfer it to other people, and it's going to form a snowball effect. So everybody's going to know about it, but what is being known is just partial part of the news, right? So that is really dangerous. Okay. Now, in Japan, people are told in the media that blood type determines personality and behavior. And mass media also reports fallacies such as 10% of our brains are being utilized, which is true. Well, ideally, I bought this as well because when I got a piece of information, frankly speaking, it was from a friend. Ideally, probably the friend got it from a certain source, right? So I researched into this. Well, it is actually not true. You might want to research on that as well. They also reported that creative people are left-brained, while logical people use the right hemisphere of the brain, which is 100% inaccurate. It's not to say that it's untrue, but it's not that accurate. All right. So despite all these inaccuracies being reported as false, they still continue being popular. Why? Because I think personally, it's what we want to believe, and we want to know. Because it's very simple information, and the simpler the information is, the easier it is for us to grasp and understand it and remember it, so that when people mention this, or when we want to talk to people about this kind of stuff, we might look a little bit smart. I don't know, maybe. All right. Okay, now let's go into the idea of the internet. So the internet has made a significant impact on people. So social networks such as Facebook's, for example, there was one, Friendster. I don't know if you guys have heard it or not. Friendster was actually a Malaysian-owned social network. Nowadays, it's not really applicable. I used it in 2004, 2005. Really, really fun. It was ideally like Facebook as well. Research on it. Social networks continue to be a powerful tool to engage people, especially young people, and governments are wary as social networks have started revolutions in their country. So before this, as I mentioned before, you are looking into platforms of which does not enable the people to provide their opinions. And now that we have this social networks which enable us to provide opinions, it's going to be difficult for the government to control the information which is being spread. So in a sense, it can be good, it can be bad. Why is it good? Good in a sense that we have a platform to provide our opinions. Bad in a sense that the opinions might not be 100% true, and sometimes misused facts can be provided to the people as well. So in that sense, it's good. Please research here. Please do your readings in yahoo.com today, as the 4th of April, if I'm not mistaken. See, the 3rd of April? 3rd of April, yep. the government has approved, the parliament has approved the, what do you call this? Information. If information is spread wrongly on the internet, you will get punished, right? I think it's equivalent to 8 years of prison and 500,000 ringgit worth of fine, more or less. So really be careful about that. Try to read on that. It's really, really good. Let's move on. Now, let's look into the impact of social networking. So over 90% of university students use social networks each week. So 25% spend 6 hours a week. So that's really, really long, isn't it? So popular networks like Facebook or Twitter can potentially harm individuals, as people have been harassed, leading to suicides, bullies, for example, the case of bullying on social media, which cause these victims to kill themselves if they are not, or they deem their reputation has been destroyed, or this kind of examples, right? So people have also used them to threaten others, and in some cases actually murder them. So this is not just looking into politics, sometimes even as students or as the young people, right? It is considered really, really dangerous if this kind of things or this kind of news are being spread, because ideally for young people what matters is themselves, their personality, their own image, so they are very, very fragile in terms of their egos and stuff. And as you get older, then you learn more and more. But at that stage of 19, 18, 17, even 20, it's very difficult. It's very dangerous if you are into or being a victim of bullying, because at this point your ego is fragile, your mental state is fragile, and sometimes other people, bullies, can actually push these victims to kill themselves. So that's the dangerous part of social networking. On the other hand, the good thing about social networking is that it provides free speech and freedom of expression. So you can provide any kind of opinion you want, any kind of information you want on the internet, and the government does not have direct control or the ability to contain them. If you're talking about, say, for example, 100,000 people providing their opinions, how do you think the government can control it? I think it's really, really impossible to do so, because you're looking into mass number of people who have the ability to be keyboard warriors and to provide their opinions or to provide information, might be true or false, but still nobody can do any kind of control over this circumstance. So that's why the government came out with the idea of having an act, an act to control people from providing false information. All right. So employers and government also monitor comments made against them. So that is ideally true, because I was thinking, if one person is punished and that one person is being sensationalized in on the mass media, for example, and other people read it, then people might not want to do it. So that was what was being practiced by the government a few times, especially in a few cases whereby the Sultan of Johor was being not there were people who actually commented on what the Sultan of Johor was doing, and these people were actually punished, right? So NSA in recent years were discovered to be spying on everyone. So that's actually really, really scary, isn't it? But this is happening in the US. Ideally, if you're looking into the context of Malaysia, then ideally, I think there's probably an agency which is looking into the things which we are doing online as well. All right, because to a certain point, it's going to be a must. Now, let's look into other issues pertaining the internet. So, pornography or sex is still the most widely searched topic on the internet. So, it's piece of, can I say, entertainment for certain people. So when is that easy to get information, then it's really, really dangerous, especially if you're talking about children who are exposed at a very early age, at the age of 7 or 8, you have pornography on their phones, smartphones. So it's really, really scary, right? So plagiarism is another issue. When we look into the internet, then when you are doing your research and stuff, you can actually search for information online. And the dangerous thing about that is sometimes we are prone into plagiarizing other people's work. So that is really, really dangerous as well. Well, when it comes to researching, it's okay for you to use the internet, but plagiarizing is another method. So please think about it when you're doing your assignments and stuff. So in summary, as critical thinkers, we must always consider the credibility and reliability of news source, be it the internet or traditional media, because ideally, uh, the reason why we are doing critical thinking, or the reason why this subject was being implemented, is because we want to, if possible, get the people to get the students who are doing this course to be critical upon getting information. Because when we get information, sometimes it's very, very easy to accept it as the whole truth, because sometimes you are too lazy to read information or to do research on information. So as critical thinkers, we really, really, really need to understand, we really need to question on whether the news is authentic, or whether there's any kind of biasness in terms of the news being provided to us, might it be from the left hand side or from the right hand side. When I say left hand, right hand, I hope you get what I mean. Because by the end of the day, we are going to be living in a world whereby uh, we make decisions in choosing who's going to lead us, right? So we really have to think about it properly, and we really have to take uh, in consideration the news which are being transmitted to us, right? So that being said, I would end this session of lecture, and I do hope that if you have any kind of question, please do ask in the tutorial classes, all right? So thank you very much. Have a good day, guys. Bye.